Welcome to New Home Insights, the podcast from John Burns Research and Consulting. I'm your host, Dean Wehrli. If you want to follow market trends, demographics, capital, new ideas, and endeavors that touch on housing, we're going to try to make sense of that every couple of weeks. Let's go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the New Home Insights podcast. I'm, let's say, your third favorite podcast host, Dean Wehrli. Today, we returned to demographics. That's something that's really at the core of what we do here at John Burns Research and Consulting. It's really forms how we think about housing trends. It helps us forecast what we think is going to happen in the housing market. It's critical because demographics not only provides hard numbers that shape housing, but it gives you a lot of the nuance that really, kind of fills out the details in the housing market. Let's understand kind of the little stuff, the on the ground stuff, as well as just big, massive, hard national and international numbers. Eric Finnigan is here to help us with that because Eric is our Vice President of Demographics Research here at JBREC. He's based in Denver. Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Dean. Glad to be here.
You're living, breathing, eating demographics every day. You're talking about all over the country. You do a lot of presentations. So you're the guy to talk to.
I like to think so. Yeah, I spend a lot of time. It's kind of it's my main course. If I have a lot of meals I eat, in a day, demographics is my main focus.
I like that. You also notice now we do a little bit of visual here. Sometimes we put like some snippets onto our social media visually. You'll see that Eric has a lush, well-groomed beard. He lives in Denver. He has to, I believe, by law. I, on the other hand, have this scraggly looking thing like I'm an old-time Western prospector named Festus, and it's not coming in well. Eric, as a beard connoisseur, what do you think of this thing that I have on me?
It's great. I was looking at my own, and it's gotten a little bit more whiter in the last few years. Just with housing being what it's been, and all of the changes that we're tracking, it's just notching, more and more gray in my beard.
Well, so mine's whiter than yours. Also, the one thing I've noticed this is the first time I've ever had a beard, I tried to have a beard, is that my facial hair growth rate is like a toddler's because it's just this is like months. So I'm embarrassed. Anyway, I just want to mention that in case people are looking at this and apologize to America. So let's start with a little bit about you first before we get on to our topics. Our main four topics are going to be first about immigration and its demographic impacts, both foreign and domestic. We're going to talk about kind of demographics from the household types and that kind of classic view of what demographics is. Then we'll talk about the housing shortage and then kind of how we feel about long-term housing demand going forward. So Eric, first just give us a sense of what you do every day, just briefly here at John Burns Research and Consulting.
Sure. So I help our clients plan around demographic shifts that are happening both today and that we can see with pretty high conviction that are happening over the long term. So things can happen with demographics very slowly. Like we know how many people were born 18 years ago. So we should have a pretty good idea of how many people turned 18 this year. On the flip side, things can change on a demographic timescale virtually overnight. Like what we saw with immigration policy shifting in early 2025, a real sea change from where it was the previous few years. So really paying attention to all that, helping our clients plan long-term, but also short-term, understanding how the buyer composition is shifting. What are the strengths and weaknesses among their buyer segments?
The shift too in immigration, because that's going to be our first module here. So let's talk about that. Let's get right into it. It predated. So like you said, it's been a shift downward for the last year and a half or so. But before that, it was pretty rapidly increased until sort of, I think the mid 2024, it actually shifted downward. Correct me if I'm wrong, before 2025, but only at the tail end of that period. And prior to that had grown very rapidly. So there's been a lot of shifts happened there in foreign immigration these last several years.
Yeah, I think that maybe the time I was on here last was maybe early 2024. We were just wrapping our heads around trying to understand what's going on at the border that was not being reported by the census. And we came out with a really big call that, census was missing more than half of what the actual immigration volume was at the time, which meant our population was growing at the fastest pace in our country's history that year. And that is turned on a dime. It's a classic kind of boom bust cycle. We had a surge in 2022 to 2024, and it's been a bust in 2025. And, even more so in 2026.
Let's start there then. What in terms of, do you have some numbers? Let's start very generally in terms of immigrations. But again, foreign immigration, we'll talk about domestic immigration in just a couple of minutes. But what are we forecasting in terms of near term, at least, in migration from foreign sources?
So I think about compared to normal. So we think about normal. If you go back the last, the pre-COVID decade, or you go back the last 50 years, normal is about 1 to 1.1 million per year. What we saw during the surge was actually 3 times that. So 3.3-ish for roughly 3 years in a row. So that added about, 10 million to our population over that period. So what we've seen since then is that it's slowed down virtually to a halt. So our southern border is effectively closed to asylum seekers or humanitarian migrants or people that want to come to the U.S. for work, working in farms or factories, on housing construction sites. That border is effectively closed. At the same time, our policy or our processes around legal immigration through the visa system, for instance, have also changed significantly. So about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, there was a new $100,000 fee slapped on H-1B applications to bring workers from outside the country into the U.S. That really curtailed, really slowed down H-1B applications. Now, that policy was recently blocked. It was challenged in courts and courts blocked it. And so that's pretty much dead in the water at this point. But there's been, roughly 3 dozen or more new immigration policies that have affected legal immigration in the last year and a half. So we think 2026 is on pace for the lowest net immigration since at least 1950.
Do you have a sense of what that number is?
We have our number. We think it's about plus 90,000. So our population is going to grow by 90,000 because of net immigration.
So 90,000 just net foreign immigration. So
correct.
Newcomers from foreign sources versus a lot of folks leaving. Do we have a sense of what the numbers are for those folks who are whether they're leaving voluntarily or being deported, et cetera?
Unfortunately, we don't have a great number for that. There's no stats that, exit interviews, but we can see from other countries that survey their population how many U.S. nationals are in their country each year. And we've seen from a few of those metrics that they've definitely increased over the last couple of years. But we don't have great numbers to know how many people are sort of self-deporting, for instance.
For the last 18 months or so. So this is really mostly, I guess it's a combination of enforcement driven, but it was really policy driven. It's these very, very new policies that are happening. You mentioned the H-1B. That's pretty near and dear to the hearts of a lot of the new folks listening who are new home builders, because a lot of those H-1B immigrants were in the tech sector or other kind of, relatively high income sectors. And they formed a pretty important bulwark of the new housing demand. And a lot of different markets, not just in the Bay Area, California, the kind of the classic area, but all over the place, including the high growth Southeast. I mean, have you seen that? Have we seen specifically these change in policies impact housing markets, particularly new home markets, but even resales too?
Yeah. So I think as a researcher, one of the things I really love about our working at John Burns is that we have surveys into every segment of housing. So we can actually test it. We can actually ask the question of home builders, apartment investors and developers, single family rental operators and investors, and build to rent builders as well. And what we've seen is that by and large, yes, each segment is seeing an impact from basically lower demand for their product due to immigration policy. So for instance, you mentioned the H-1B and new home buyers. We heard from some clients, say in Texas, parts of the Northwest as well, that cultural buyers used to make up in some of their communities up to 80% of all buyers per year. And that's dropped down to a quarter of that. So 20% of new buyers in the last
Eric,
year.
It can be, there's some markets, because I do a lot of my work in the Bay Area, and there's some markets where it's 99% of new home buyers. And there's been a shift. You mentioned, I think the biggest shift, tell me if you can actually get this fine with it, has been a lot of the South Asian buyers, folks from India, maybe Pakistan. Have you seen that get more impacted, or is there not the data for that?
Yeah, we don't have great data on that. We could pick up on it anecdotally. Like if we know that, some of the suburbs in north of Dallas is where, that population would concentrate, see a lot of impact there. So there's been, builders reporting to us in our surveys, but also there's been articles. There's a big Bloomberg article a few months ago about the cultural buyer really getting spooked, not just because of their if you think about it, so the H-1B fee, this is where I think it gets really interesting.
The $100,000 fee, that was been challenged in court, correct?
Yeah. So it only applied to people coming into the country. So nobody that's actually in the country currently. But what we heard is that people that were in the country on H-1Bs, they saw that their renewal could be up, could be at risk. And they wouldn't know until it changed, if it ever did. So they really got spooked. They really pulled back in a lot of the country.
It's just injected a massive amount of uncertainty to those folks and those households. And just to be clear, Eric and I are not, we do this completely politically neutral. We just want to make sure we share what the actual impacts are happening from these policies. So it is fair to say that, we have definitely seen that critical buyer be impacted in terms of their volumes.
100%.
How about in terms of resales? And you think about this mostly in new home buyers, because let's be honest, that cohort is very attracted to new home, even over resale. And have we seen this, though, have an impact in the existing home sector as well?
Yeah. So in our resale agent survey, so we survey, 1,000 or so resale agents every month. And we've picked up on this as early as last summer. A lot of the rhetoric with Canada and tariffs was really heating up, and the possibility, just the adversarial relationship with Canada, right? We saw in our surveys that resale agents, especially in Florida, for instance, said that foreign buyers were pulling back way more than they expected. And this is, these are vacation home buyers, maybe they're snowbirds coming down for the winter. But that foreign buyer really pulled back in the resale market too. But I think what you're right is typically a foreign buyer, if they're looking for a new home, they go into the new home market rather than the resale market, because it's sort of plug and play. It's very move-in ready. There's not a lot of maintenance. It's just ready to move in.
Yeah. That's been true for a very long time. I know you mentioned that we really can't fine tune it to the level of the market, but at least is it fair to say that this impact has been felt in all throughout the country, including those high growth markets in the Southeast? You mentioned Dallas, but how about into the Southeast? Has it had an impact there as well?
Yeah. We've seen it, in the Carolinas, Atlanta, Florida, all over.
Yeah. I think some folks are surprised that buyer is vastly more universal than kind of the classic areas that you think that impacts. How about the rental sector? Has there been an impact from this on renting? And if you can, Eric, maybe differentiate a little bit between single family homes or maybe BTR built to rent and apartments.
Yeah. So from our surveys, what we found is that the biggest impact, or the most sort of widespread impact, was in apartments rather than single family rental or built to rent. What we actually find is mostly in this, if you think about the immigration surge that happened in the last few years, we find actually they mostly ended up in smaller multifamily rentals in submarkets that would be considered sort of middle or lower income. So not a rental market wide phenomenon, but the effect of it, they did increase the population of renters in the country, which maybe, they weren't renting in the new sort of class A plus high rises in, downtown Nashville, for instance, but they filled up but they filled up a bunch of other rental units throughout the market. So people were sort of filtering up, really boosting the rental demand in the country. We see less so single family rental or build to rent, mostly focused in, apartments.
Okay. That's interesting. How about one more topic before we move to domestic immigration, which is labor, right? It's a little different, but it's clearly impacted by the shrinking levels of legal immigration and immigration in general. Have we seen these trends impact the availability of labor in the housing sector?
Yeah. Again, from our surveys, we can read anecdotes. There's a lot of news articles about this. It's been hard to really get data on it.
Yeah.
But we do survey home builders on this question. We have surveyed fix and flip investors. We have surveyed remodeling contractors as well. And again, across the board, impact on labor supply, especially the unskilled labor for these projects. We actually find mostly is that the larger home builders are a little more insulated than the smaller sort of remodeling contractors or fix and flip investors. So the larger home builders will have a pretty secure labor base already. And they have pretty tight controls over who they let on a job site anyway, right?
Yeah.
Less so for a remodeling contractor. But what we have seen from our surveys is unequivocally, yes, we're seeing impact. And I almost wonder if that's even underreported, because if you go to events and you ask, hey, have you seen impact on your labor supply? Most of the room would say yes.
Yeah, I think so too. And maybe it gets worse though, do you think? Because right now we have seen starts slow most builders responding to the conditions of the market have pulled back a little bit, and they're trying to catch up and have less standing inventory. As the market normalizes, if immigration stays the same, do you think this gets worse?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons it hasn't shown up as a real issue for the larger builders and a lot of the home builders in general. Fewer starts means less labor needed, and labor demand is coming down at the same time that labor supply is coming down. So it's been an interesting kind of balance there. We don't see it in the data yet, but I am concerned. I know we've talked to other people out in the industry. What they're concerned about is that what about when building activity does rebound? What if we go from 1.3 million starts to 1.5 million? Will we have enough labor, or are they self-deporting out of the country temporarily? We don't really know.
Yeah,
but that's definitely something to watch, because as building activity does rebound, we'll sort of see how that plays out.
Yeah. So let's go to domestic immigration. For so long, that great sucking sound, as a former president once said, was the sound of people moving from, say, California and the colder climate northern states down to the south, down into Texas and Florida, the Carolinas, et cetera. That's kind of changed a little bit. So talk, if you can, Eric, about what are the latest in domestic in-migration patterns, and who's benefiting, who's growing more, who's growing less?
Yeah. So there's some interesting shifts lately. But I can say, so if you think about the number of households that are moving cross country, so who would end up in the Southeast, who would end up on the West Coast, we find that still the largest sort of destination for households moving cross country is the Southeast.
Okay.
So about 1/5 of long distance sort of cross country movers end up in the Southeast. What's been interesting is that the couple of sort of technically sleepy areas, or traditionally sleepy areas, have been gaining share of those long distance sort of cross country movers. I'm going to call out the Midwest. I've seen it, and some people were calling this out recently, but it's showing up in our data that we track change of addresses essentially for as many adults in the US as we can, and that the Midwest is gaining more share of long distance cross country movers.
Places like Indianapolis, the Minneapolis, Chicago, even.
It's less so Chicago, but it's definitely Minneapolis is seeing it's kind of a resurgence of population because of people moving in from elsewhere in the country. Chicago still has a net loss of population due to domestic migration, but surrounding metro areas outside the Chicago sort of typical, by definition, metro area are gaining. So Chicagoans are moving further afield. To, Lake County, Indiana, Lake County, Illinois, which are two different lake counties, but they're.
Well, I thought that Chicagoland was pretty much most of the Midwest, including Indiana. And
that's right. I mean, it might as well be.
Literally Chicagoland. And you see a map of that. Guys, settle down. So how about the Northeast?
Yeah, the Northeast is also gaining shares. So when people talk about net migration, is people moving in minus people moving out. So the net migration, talking about just the number of people moving in. So the gross inflows, more people moving into the Northeast than in the past.
And do you think that's related to affordability, or what do you think is driving that?
Could be affordability. Actually, that's a good question. I think it's somewhat of affordability, but I think also that if they would have, in other times moved to Florida or Texas or California, those are just less affordable. Those have become less affordable than in the past. Yeah. So on a relative basis, even though Northeast, New York and parts of New Jersey, DC, Boston, those are super expensive.
Has job growth been a factor there? I mean, historically, job growth has been a big part of the Southeast. Growth is a combination of that's where some new jobs are. Net job growth is there, but also it's massively more affordable than California for sure, but a lot of those older communities in the Midwest and Northeast as well. So is it kind of a combo? Have you seen that evidence of that?
Yeah, it's partly job growth. Interestingly, though, job growth is less important for migration than it used to be. The hire rates are still very low after COVID. We had a surge in hiring, and it's coming back, but it's a lot lower than it used to be. So fewer people moving for jobs in the past.
Is it the Colts? I guess
It's
It's the twins, I guess, maybe something like that. I mean, it's interesting though that has that, but I don't have an explanation for that. I've always thought historically, especially people moving out of California, a lot of people, oh, it's this or that. No, it's affordability. It's 99% affordability. So I wonder what's happening in the Midwest. That seems to be something attracting folks there, not just sort of, hey, it's the cheapest I can afford a home.
Yeah, I think it's, there's always going to be people moving around the country, but I think what we're seeing for the Midwest is if you want to buy a home at under 300,000, there's very few places in the country that you can still do that. My hometown in Syracuse, New York, you can still do that temporarily before Micron has made a big investment there, but also in the Midwest, still very affordable homes.
Is Syracuse, by the way, I just saw this anecdote. Is this true? I just saw something that Syracuse is the last place in the country where you still have the red light on a stoplight below the green light on the stoplight. Is that true?
Yeah, you're getting near and dear to my heart here. That's in Tipperary Hill in Syracuse, which is a traditionally Irish neighborhood.
Yes.
And that's where my mom grew up. And I was she always tells me about that. And I'm like, why would they put the green above? Is it because, why would they do that? And there's a whole story. But yeah, the one stop in the country.
Right? It was the Irish because the red was for British English and the green was for Irish. And no. You cannot. You won't put Irish below English here in this town.
That's right.
Sorry. I just saw that it's like some, I don't know, History Channel thing or something like that. I was going, is that true? So I thought I'm going to ask Eric.
I never thought I would talk about Tipperary Hill on a podcast, but here we are.
I know we have trouble getting our handle on actual volumes, but are these some big numbers, or just like you said, most folks are still moving to the Southeast. It's a relative change, and that's caught a lot of folks' attention. Is it still fairly small volumes that are moving to some of these Midwest and Northeast places?
Yeah. So I mean, overall, migration volumes are way down, in the last, say, 12 months versus even 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a bit of like a relative shift there. So Midwest might look better today, but if we saw the resale market thaw out a bit and more buyers and sellers, we might see, more people move around the country and fewer move into the Midwest on a percentage basis, right?
Okay.
There's still mortgage lock-in effect is still a thing. We maybe talk about this a little bit later, but we're tracking that there's a growing backlog of homeowners that want to buy and sell their home, but they're waiting for rates to be better, or waiting for more confidence, or waiting for something. They're just sort of staying put longer than they would like to be.
Do you have any sense at all, and it's okay if you don't, but the who of these domestic immigrants? So, I mean, the obvious thing seems like it'd be, if you're going from a high cost market to a lower cost market, are you turning some renters into homeowners? Is that something that's part of this migration pattern?
Yeah, that's been very true in the pandemic and immediately post. So people moving from, say the Northeast or cities to, say, the Southeast, like a Charlotte or Raleigh or Atlanta, to buy a home and enjoy the lifestyle of a homeowner, where it's much harder to do that in, say, Brooklyn. But looking for affordable housing or better housing for their, a better sort of more bang for their buck and their housing dollar is still a really big reason people move really long distances.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's switch over now to that classic demographic types and trends. Think, things like buyer types, renter types, segments, life stage patterns, things like that. Let's start with big numbers again. That sheer growth of population and our households. What is that change? What are we looking at in the near term? What do we forecast for, let's say, national level of growth going the next year, 2, 3 years?
Yeah, in terms of growth, we're coming off several years of sort of above normal growth, and now we're below normal. But we think that over the next 10 years, the population is going to grow a little over 1 million per year.
Okay.
About half of that from our natural increase, so more births than deaths, and about half of that, the other half, from the net immigration, sort of foreign-born folks moving in.
Is that something that, how does that relate to, I don't know, like the 1990s on an annual basis, or the 1980s or something like that, something way before 2000s? Is that just massively, is that a lot less?
It is a lot less, partially due to we fewer babies born each year. So we went from about 4 million births on average in the 1990s to the 2000s decade to we're at 3.6 million per year. We've been stuck at 3.6 million for the last few years. So we're not having as many kids as a country as we used to.
Okay.
So our birth rate, 3.6 million per year, is the same number we had in 1983. Our country was a lot smaller then. So it just points to the shift. Our society's undergone a lot of shifts since then. It's basically meant fewer babies born. On the flip side of that too, with an aging population, our oldest baby boomer is now 80 years old this year. We'll start to see a lot more, or incrementally, I would say, more people passing away. So that difference between babies born and people passing away is our natural increase. And that used to be really wide. It used to be 1.5 million, 2 million. Now it's 500,000. We think it's going to get progressively narrower from here so that sometime in the 2030s, we'll have more people dying each year than being born. First time in our country's history.
So our natural growth rate will go negative in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's mostly from, correct me if I'm wrong, it's mostly from the downward trend in folks, households having kids are waiting a much longer time to have kids than it is from people dying at a higher rate, outside of COVID.
That's right. Different choices around how people start and form families and grow families. It's a big reason.
So, okay. Are you insisting people start having babies? Are you Eric Finnigan trying to pressure people to have babies? Is that what's happening here? Just kidding.
Do what you need to do.
Wow. So I guess the answer is yes. Okay.
For housing, bail out the housing industry. Have more kids.
Have more kids. Yeah. So in terms of the cohorts, we look at like 10-year age cohorts here. I think I can tell the answer to this, but are we continue to see the big growth in the people from their 60s, 70s, 80s, and much less growth? Who else besides the older cohorts are having any kind of growth at all, or any of the younger cohorts having?
Yeah, so we'll see sort of the effect of the Gen X population, which is smaller than the baby boomers slightly. So as they sort of move through their sort of empty nester active adult years, we're actually see that mid 50s to late 60s population decline over the next 10 years. So it's really important for active adult, anyone that's building homes for that active adult buyer 55 to say 70. They wrote a big demographic tailwind as the baby boomers were passing through that generation over the last 15, 20 years. And I don't think it's necessarily a sort of a huge negative, but they're not going to have that same demographic tailwind as they used to. The other segment of the population that we see declines in would be under 25-year-olds.
Okay.
So again, that just because of past birth rates are lower. So we've gone through now roughly 18 years of falling birth rates relative to the peak year. So we just know with pretty high certainty that this young population is going to keep declining. Unless we see some big turnaround in birth rates or immigration policy, we can virtually lock that in, that our young population is going to be smaller in the mid-2030s than it is today.
So let's tease out some effects of that before we go to some other household types. So we see shrinking trends in younger folks. Does that mean bad things for the rental sector, the apartment sector specifically?
I think the rental sector doesn't. It's not great, I would say. But on the flip side of that, the rental sector will benefit from people renting longer. So typical renter ages, if we might have thought, at some point in the past, it was like people in their 20s or early 30s. And now it's kind of late 20s to their late 30s is the typical. So for instance, just a stat that I have committed to memory here is 72% of renters today are 30 plus, which is a record high.
Yeah, so by a lot, I bet.
Yeah, older renter population. So anybody that's building rental homes, your typical renter is older today than they have been in the past.
So they're benefiting from sort of a lot larger demand pool, even if the classic younger households that were so important to the rental sector is diminishing.
That's right.
Okay. How about in terms of SFR BTR? That's that's a little more friendly towards older renters. Do you see that sector sort of benefiting? If the denominator is going up for rental and they're getting older and they're staying renter longer, does that help SFR and BTR specifically?
Yeah. So one stat that we've published in the past is that the number of people turning 35 every single day for the next 10 years is going to be over 13,000. So that's over 4 million a year, which is, it's never been higher. It's just at a record high currently. And it'll be more of a plateau. So if you think of who is renting BTR, who is renting infill single family rental homes, scatter site, they skew older than I think typical rental apartments. So that population is actually quite healthy in terms of growth. The mid 30s to mid 40s population, it's really where the millennials are sort of replacing Gen X in that sort of age group. Millennials are bigger than Gen X, so that population is going to grow.
Historically, we would have seen that trend, folks turning 35, as a boon to the for sale market. But now, because of life stage changes, because people do things later, it's actually helping renters just as much. Or
it's definitely helping rental operators today. It'll turn into a boon for home builders. It's just that, with rates where they are and home prices where they are, it takes a lot more to qualify to buy a home today, which I know you've talked about in the past with Eric Leeper.
How about in terms of families? That was also such a critical part of the new home buying sector. Are we continue to see the share of households that are family households shrink?
Yeah. So I would say, the TLDR here is yes. People are just getting married at later and later ages. They're having their first kid later also as a result. And for various reasons, when they do have kids, they have fewer of them. So in general, we can think about fewer families overall. So if people do form a couple, they're less likely to have kids than they were in the past. Those that do have kids have them at a later date. And those families that do start are smaller.
Yeah.
So it's just, think about this. It's, the typical life stage of going from rental to first time home buyer. There's a lot more different choices available for people. So I think that, again, where that BTR single family rental really slots in is it lets people enjoy the benefits of home ownership. Maybe they want a dog instead of a kid first anyway.
I would definitely recommend that from experience. Absolutely. Yeah. For sure. My kids don't listen to the show, so that's fine. So how about in terms of specifically multi-generational households? That's been a big topic kind of in new home world for a while now. It's become a pretty important part of how you design homes. We just talked about immigration aspects a little bit ago. Is there any evidence that we might see a decrease in the demand for multi-generational housings, both because fewer families and also because immigration aspects?
I think that could affect it. I think one of the stronger sort of counterbalances to that, if we're talking about a scale here, I would put the fact that, the 75 plus population is going to grow by almost 50% over the next 10 years. I think that's going to swamp the effect of, a little bit less, less immigration for the next couple of years.
Okay.
And then, the slowdown in families. We'll definitely see these older folks, they want to stay in their home as long as they can, age in place. We see a lot more of that, definitely. Yeah. But one of the big last sort of life stage transitions for these older folks is they'll leave their home that they own and move in with their adult children.
They're adult. Okay. You still think that's going to continue to happen? Because again, the number of aging Americans continues to expand.
Yeah, it's going to keep going.
Okay. How about in other things in terms of that aging? Like, do you see sort of maybe a coming boon or a continued increase in demand for things like assisted living and memory care and at least independent living? Those sectors are sector.
Yeah, to the extent that those are, again, population driven. Once people hit a certain life stage, we see it once people hit 75, really. Those that do age in place, stay where they are. We see increasing shares as people get older. They either go to live with their family or live into, a group setting, age target or age restricted or senior living type situation. So it's coming.
Real quick, before we go on to again this national housing shortage, the last thing in this module is how would you then just advise home builders and developers? What should they be thinking about? Things like, okay, there's going to be fewer families, but people are going to age. There's going to be maybe more multi-generational households. Anything like sort of insights of how we should think about design and development?
Yeah, I would say the home buyer is a lot more diverse, and not just from the ethnic background, which is definitely also true, but the needs in the home are going to be very different today, in 10 years than they are today. So, think about the first time home buyer is going to be older. It means they're further along in their career. They probably have a lot more savings built up. So that first time home buyer could probably afford a bigger home. They might want a bigger home than typical first-time home buyers from past generations.
What's the median age now, Eric, for the first-time home buyer? I just saw that stat somewhere.
There's a stat that says somewhere between 35 and 40. It depends on who you ask, who you survey.
Okay.
35 to 40. It's been getting gradually older over time.
Yeah. That would have been like, I think, late 20s, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else along that, like maybe aging, or what does it mean if people are doing things later? Because it still seems like the families, in terms of the share of new home purchases, is it fair to say families are a little bit overrepresented relative to their share of the total population? So in other words, think of the bucket of new home buyers versus the bucket of all American households. Is the share in that bucket of new home buyers a little more family oriented than the share of all American households, regardless of whether they're new home buyers, resale buyers, or renters?
Well, I believe so. Yeah. And, I know the sort of growth in that buyer population has shifted from millennials, or not millennials. They've shifted from the entry level, the 30 to 39 or so. We're going to see a lot more move-up buyers. So homeowners that exist today, people that are in a home that they own, that either grow a family or they just want more space. They're going to go from a starter home or an entry-level home into a move-up. And we've already seen some builders start to really pivot to serve that population. So I think we'll see that a lot more in the next.
But that diversity, it seems like it's everything, because you have singles, you have couples, you have single parent family households, you have so many. It is such a much more diverse profile. You are having to design for a lot of different people than you used to have to think about 20 years ago. Which is, that keeps it interesting, honestly.
Yeah, I think Michaela Arroyo on our New Home Trends Institute team just wrote an article, Time to Remove the Idea of a Dream Home.
Yeah.
There's no one idea of a dream home now. It's every family has their own sort of unique needs. So I think it's a really interesting time to be a designer of homes. It
is, but you really have to stay on top of the trends, and not just the trends nationally, but the trends locally, to really get a handle on that. Okay, so national housing shortage. When you were last on, I forgot to mention, by the way, up front, that this is Eric's second time. He's on about a year and a half ago-ish or so. You talked quite a bit about the kind of the national housing shortage and how there's a lot of measures of this, and they vary a ton, but they're difficult to quantify. And part of it is folks just are asking kind of different questions or measuring different things. So how has that changed in a year and a half from your thinking? Where are we at now with this idea of how many units are we short of what we should be supplying here in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I would say we underbuilt homes from 2015 to about 2022. That resulted in a progressively larger and larger backlog or undersupply of homes. So we went from basically balanced in 2015 to 2 million units over or underbuilt in 2022. So this is not enough homes being built, but also a surge in household formation coming out of the pandemic. Since then, we've seen a inflection point, meaning we're less undersupplied nationally than we used to be. If we look at what is the occupancy rate of housing today versus what we think it normally should be, still above normal, but less so. So that means we can't say that there's a national undersupply and every market is undersupplied anymore. We've gone through a historic, hopefully once in a generation supply cycle in multifamily, where a lot of the markets in the Southeast or in the Sun Belt had a lot of new units delivered. So there's housing stock expanded immensely. And so if you're looking at, say, if you're standing in downtown Denver, where I live, and you see all the empty buildings or all the empty units on Spear, how can you say that the market is undersupplied?
Yeah.
It sort of doesn't make sense. So you have to really think, okay, this national number is a rule of thumb. It's kind of gives us a general guideline that nationally, we have higher occupancy of housing nationally than we would expect. Some markets oversupplied, some are undersupplied. On the flip side of that too, so we're talking about supply for the existing stock of households. This might get a little technical here. And we struggle with how to explain this in a really plain sort of English kind of way.
Our listeners are very smart. Go ahead.
So we think about we have about a shortage of about 1 million vacant homes relative to today's existing households. So 135 million households. We need about 1 million more vacant homes for people that just want to be moving, regular turnover. If they get another job or they want to buy their first home. We also have to look at or think about what are the households that would have existed in the past under normal household formation rates, but for some reason don't. And we've done a lot of the math on that, testing a lot of different assumptions. The number ranges from somewhere between 4 million and 8 plus million. We think the lower number, this 4 million number, is still a little bit too high to think about. These are missing households that will eventually form. But if we compare today's household forming rates at today's population versus a normal household forming rate, we have just over 4 million fewer households than we would expect. So at some point, some of those will form. The younger folks that have stayed home with parents longer than they would normally, or they're living with roommates longer than they would normally because homes are, it's harder to find a home for sale that's affordable. At some point, they will move out, some of them. So we do have to think about that other missing households side of the equation as well.
One of the key factors in these estimations, though, is that vacancy rate and how many homes are vacant. That's a tricky metric, though, because I could see it undercount things like investment homes that really aren't available, or second, third, fourth, fifth homes that really aren't available, or even substandard homes that really aren't that livable. I mean, do you worry about that aspect impacting that critical variable that goes into these computations that you're making?
Yeah, we try to solve for that. So there's some estimates out there that'll have, housing shortage of the, 5 and 10 million or more range.
Yeah.
We think it's lower because we actually don't consider them as available. We're only looking at homes available for sale or homes available for rent today relative to this existing stock of households. So it's really just for households that are looking to move, what homes are available to them at that point in time.
But wouldn't overcounting the availability of homes, the reverse of what you do, wouldn't that increase the perception of oversupply, right? And decrease the perception of undersupply, right? If you're counting too many homes as quote unquote, too many homes as available for people to live in.
Yeah. So I would say that, so the way the census breaks out vacant homes is really confusing and really, I would say suboptimal, to be really objective and politically neutral here. But they're counting households that are empty because they're under renovation. They're counting households that are used as second homes. Or seasonal use homes as vacant. They're really not truly vacant homes. They're not available. They won't be put up for sale anytime soon. So if you do count the whole vacant stock of homes as a vacancy rate, it's going to give you a very different conclusion. But the fact is, if you just look at that number of homes that are available for sale or rent today, is the occupancy rate or vacancy rate there. Vacancy rate is below normal. Occupancy rate is above normal.
Okay. And household formations have been at a much lower level for a few years now. What happens if those return to normal? What happens to your estimations of housing shortage if those formation levels kind of kick back toward normal?
We would see a burst of household formation if we saw, the additional sort of 3 million young adults that are stuck at home with parents today than more than normal. They would form, 1 to 2 million additional households. So we would see vacant homes fill up. That vacancy rate that we look at relative to normal would fall even further. So our undersupply would grow as a result. You have to think about what are the conditions under which, missing households form. It's things like the job market gets a lot better, or the relative cost of housing relative to incomes comes back into more normal ranges. If mortgage rates come down, makes the for sale, monthly mortgage payment more manageable for people. And so we'll see that sort of unlocking of sort of pent up demand.
Okay. Well, let's talk then about long-term demand then. All these factors we've just talked about, if you kind of combine them and aggregate them and tease them out, what are you seeing? What are we seeing here for our kind of just total volume of housing demand, again, at the national level, near term?
So we think that about 1 million households form each year on net. So 1 million more form than we lose due to people moving in together or passing away, so on and so forth. It's just a net growth of about 1 million per year, just under 1 million per year over the next 10 years, but let's say 1 million in a year. We also want to add on top of that the loss of housing from obsolescence or condemnation or storm damage, which we see a lot more of these days. So we want to actually account for replacing those. So that we think that's about just under 250,000 per year. So 230,000 more homes needed just to replace those that we lose for other reasons.
Okay.
And we also want to include some new second homes. So the Gen X population that are sort of empty nesters that maybe buy or rent homes near their grandkids. We want to add on a little bit for that as well. All told, we think the number of homes needed per year is about 1.3 million.
Okay.
And that's, again, demographics based. So it's gonna be how many homes we actually start, how many actually homes we deliver to the market is going to be higher or lower than that, depending on what builders do and what capital availability and all the big.
But demographic based demand is for roughly this 1.3 million figure.
That's right.
Okay. And that compares to years past unfavorably well, at least in terms of growth. That's a smaller number than almost, for a very long time going back.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you compare to the first half of the 2020s where we saw, we had 1.4 million net growth of households per year. We think that's going to be 1 million to just under 1 million over the next 10 years. So it's going to be down by about a third, just relative to the last 5 years.
Okay. Is that economic? Is the economy kind of the main driver of this, or is it other factors? Is it really much more of a demographic? Does the economy have any impact on this household formation? And
the economy has some impact, especially for younger folks that are living at home with parents currently. If they get jobs or pay is really well, they're more likely to live on their own. The biggest driver here is demographics. So it's our 18 plus population growth. That would be probably the number one variable thing to pay attention to get really smart on over the next 10 years is 18 plus population growth. And then you layer on top of that, how big are household sizes? So that's another key variable. And we think household sizes are actually going to get a little bit smaller than they have been. So the number of households is going to grow faster than this 18 plus population, but this is getting kind of in the weeds here a little bit. But it's really the population growth and then the living choices among, adults.
Okay. Again, we hear about pent-up demand. That's a big part of it. And when we don't have enough demand for years, we look at EP ratios often, that jobs over permits and those very high numbers over 1.2, that indicates a lot of demand is not getting satisfied, economic-based demand not getting satisfied. And we say a lot in the housing market, okay, and this is pent-up demand. Does that always get satisfied? I mean, sometimes it get exported, but will pent-up demand always get satisfied, or may it just, never get fully satiated?
Yes and no, I think. So if you think about it, so one way we think about pent-up demand is you think about sort of the average sort of 28-year-old. Take the average 28-year-old today versus 30 years ago. The average 28-year-old today is much more likely to be living with parents for a little bit longer than they used to. And it's not just that they're living at home longer than they used to, it's more socially acceptable than it used to be.
Yeah, I wish it wasn't, but yeah.
That's for 28-year-olds. You flip to someone that's 38 years old. Is it socially acceptable to live at home with parents still?
Is it really?
Probably less so, I would say.
Okay, good. How about 48?
Yeah, but what we actually find is the longer people are living with their parents, what we've seen, about 1 in 4 25 to 34-year-olds are still at home with parents. We see that share actually get closer to normal levels the older people get. So what it means is that they're staying home longer, but it's not a lost household, it's just a delayed new household.
Okay. So it does eventually, that's to say that, let's go to life stage. We know that everybody's doing everything later, but that does eventually spin out into household formations. It just takes them a long time. Do you see that trend changing, even stabilizing anytime soon?
It's hard to say. I could say maybe make a case for it to stabilize, but the reason, I think the big reason behind it is that it started because more people were going to college. So instead of moving out of your parents' house at 18 and some people go to college for sure, but some people really get their first job and, think about the 1950s and 60s, they're working, right? More people stay in school longer, getting their undergrad or their master's degree or stay on even longer. So that pushes everything out longer. The other thing that's happened is that people are way more focused on getting financially secure before they make these big life stage movements. So you talk to my parents when they were a young couple. They weren't thinking in the same way that young people do today. They were, pick on my parents, but if young people today are way more focused on waiting to sometimes, in some cases, even date, but certainly get married and start a family until they're firmly established in their careers and their financial situation is secure or even more than secure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. It just, yeah. So, I mean, there is a biological aspect to this in terms of, at least in terms of having kids, there is, at least for half the population. So that does put kind of a limit on that, but it could just be that a lot more households will just never become families with kids as time goes on.
That's right. There's new data out there that shows, the sort of completed fertility rate, which means, by the time a woman reaches, her late 40s, we can have a pretty good assumption of how many kids she's going to have, right? And that's been coming down for a little while now. So there is some catch up happening where, people are delaying starting families and they're having more later, but it does, like you say, squeeze that sort of period where family formation is a real choice and a real option for people. So it is lowering our family formation rates over time.
And it has to lower household size almost certainly too. Because again, you have a stop at having kids at some point. So you try to squeeze them into a shorter time span. That's difficult.
Yeah. Fewer kids. Think more pets though. People still want space. They still want,
again, all for that.
Yeah.
All for that.
Yeah.
More dogs, fewer kids. I'm behind that.
Are you a stockholder in Chewy.com?
Not, but I should think about that. So one more real quick thing is that a positive, the aging population, the older households, doesn't that also mean that we have this gigantic equity, this wealth factor that has potential to be, we've been talking about this for years. Have we seen any sign of the real demographic realization of this wealth being transferred to younger cohorts, or do you expect to see that in the near future?
Yes and no. I hate to be so on both hands here, but we do see, renters today from our surveys say about 20% of them say we expect help from our parents or our relatives to buy a home. There's just no other option to be able to afford the down payment, and in some cases be able to afford the monthly mortgage payment too. On the flip side of that, I think the breadth of that impact, could be much higher in sort of higher cost of living areas. So we see in Southern California, a lot more first-time buyers probably get help from their parents than first-time buyers in Kansas City, for instance, right?
Okay.
And that wealth effect, that wealth transfer down is going to be really concentrated among already wealthy families. Okay. So it's not the panacea that's going to make housing affordable for people. Yeah. Unfortunately.
That's okay. Well, that's a down. I try to make that into a positive. You made it into a negative. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate that. Real quick, now let's end then, Eric, with kind of a little tease about something you're looking at or something you have looked at for a while, and you're kind of recalibrating a little bit of how we think about how many homes we need going forward. What do you see as the new normal in household formation? What does that mean for housing here, at least the near-ish term?
Yeah. So one way we think about this is, just the number of housing occupied. So this is a household measure. It says stock of housing. One other way we look at this, I'm not sure if we wanted to go this direction, but one thing we're looking at is actually just the transactions approach. So how many home sales would we expect this year if it was a normal sort of housing market? And then compare that to how many are you actually seeing? And then you go back in time. If we have, the spoiler alert here is that we have fewer home sales than we would expect given our demographics.
Yeah.
And we've seen that now for at least a few years. So we add up all those missing home sales. What do we get for the backlog as of today of home sales that would have happened in a normal environment, but just haven't? And that to me points to a future where if mortgage rates do come down, if prices do get more affordable, what is the market response going to be? Are we going to see if mortgage rates come down, is it just going to be a sort of steady slog up and improvement in sales? Or is there going to be a unleashing sort of dynamic where you're sort of, think about water behind a dam, right? If you unplug that dam, it's going to come out with a lot of force. So we're trying to measure that water behind the dam, and the can't give out specific numbers. We haven't completed the analysis yet, but we're looking at all these different assumptions, what makes the most sense. But our bracketed sort of number here is it's in the millions of missing home sales. So points to a potential when mortgage rates do come down or prices do become more affordable relative to incomes, then we see a big response in home sales, which is great news for home builders, great news for anybody associated with a resale transaction, including agents, brokers, also remodeling companies, and then anybody supplying, any product companies that are supplying remodeling contractors or retailers. So some really positive news there, I think, to be able to look forward to.
At the risk of me being the downer here, I think it's weird because you're a demographer. The economic parts of that, or at least the like lower prices or lower mortgage rates, has the potential, as you just outlined, to unleash a tremendous amount of improved demand. In my sense, though, the demographic part of that maybe is the opposite, because you have to say, okay, the current normal is not the new normal. We're going to go back to those household formation and life stage things that we had before. And I don't think we are. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
Yeah, I would say, it's all a big if. Like, if mortgage rates come down, who knows? We thought,
I know. Will that induce people to get married, have kids, buy a new home? I mean, I think short term, the pent up demand, yes. Longer term, will it change things like household formation, things like doing things at earlier ages? I don't know.
Yeah. Do we ever get back to like a previous normal? Yeah. Probably not. But if we get halfway back, that's still quite a bit, right?
The numbers you're talking about are pretty eye popping. So then Eric, let's end there at a semi-positive after you really, really tried to turn my positive into a negative, and say goodbye. And thank you a lot for coming on the show, Eric.
Thanks so much, Dean. Appreciate it.
This is Dean Wehrli for the New Home Insights podcast. We'll see you again soon. Since you forgot to hit the stop button, I'm going to take a second to tell you about our weekly Building Market Intelligence newsletter. Over 40,000 smart folks get these timely takes on the housing market in their inbox every week, and you can too by heading to jbreg.com/subscribe and signing up.